what I would say is, cross-gender performance is rooted in many cultures. In Japanese theater, it's those actors who play the female roles are revered artists. And in Elizabethan theater in Shakespeare's day, women weren't allowed on stage. So young boys had to transform themselves into female characters. And it's always been a little subversive and a little bit daring. And, I think people have these very fixed ideas of what male and female are. And I think our culture is starting to evolve. But drag, many say that drag comes from an obscure stage direction from some Elizabethan or Jacobean script that abbreviated dressed as girl as drag. So there's a little, tidbit of historical info. So I just think that cross-gender performance is always going to be with us because it is sort of the ultimate transformation. And it will endure in one form or another, and trends come and go. But I'm very hopeful of our gay culture as it goes forward. I think that we need to keep these forms alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are very proud, the New Bedford Festival Theater, of having an honored guest that we are interviewing today. And I can't think of a single person who was there by our sides back in 1990 when we formulated the New Bedford Festival Theater and decided to do La Cage aux Folles as our first production, our inaugural production, if you will. I am very, very honored to be welcoming James Beeman, a man of 1,000 faces, a man of 1,000 roles. And I kind of think that I was very fortunate to have him in the very first show that I produced. So it's an amazing thing. So without any further delay, here is Jamie Beeman today. Jamie, welcome to this interview, and welcome back home, if you will.
Thank you. It's great to see you. And yeah, that summer was a very significant summer for us both. I'm honored to have been a part of a beautiful, beautiful production of a show that has been very meaningful in my life. And when COVID happened last year, the show that I was actually doing was La Cage aux Folles down in Florida, and I was playing Alban and Zaza, and after a week of wonderful performances, we had to close because Florida declared a state of emergency, and we all went into lockdown. And I'll tell you, when we sang The Best of Times, it took on a whole new meaning, And I think that we've learned that we have to stay in the now, and we have to make the most of the moments that we have. And even if we're stuck in our apartments under quarantine.
Well, you'll be interested to know, I'm finding it very interesting to hear what you're saying, that we did a one-night gala show titled The Best of Times, and you were part of that on the screen, which is great. I'm hoping to see you live in person soon when this starts to open up a bit more. In any event, we ended the show, the finale of the show, and Wendy directed it, as well as producing it. She really got a full plate on that assignment. And we ended the show with The Best of Times, little knowing in November 30th of 2019 that 3 months later we closed on March 12th, the same day as Broadway.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was rather devastating, and we still have not opened at the Zeiterion, as Wendy has mentioned to you, and as we are now also informing our audience, is that we are having an event that's coming up soon as part of Pride Month, Gay Pride Month in the city of New Bedford. So, and you're part of that, and I can't, like I keep saying, I can't think of a better person to be representing the organization in its 31st year, and also the theater. everything that theater means to all of us. And I want to start by thanking you because you were the backbone of that production. I've got to tell you that. I don't think I adequately conveyed to you all of my feelings of thanks and gratitude at the time because it was new for me. It was hectic setting up an organization to begin with. We did it very quickly. And I was always amazed that you knew exactly what to do when it came to the makeup. You showed the rest of the men in the cast how to apply it. And you're a consummate professional. It brings me to my first question to you. The first question I would like to ask you is, had you ever done a drag role in a show before?
At that time, no. But I was brought up by two theater educators. My father was a set design professor at Boston University, and my mother had her own theater company when I was a kid. And from the time I was about 12 years old, I got interested in makeup and disguise of different types. My idol was Lon Chaney, who's the Phantom of the Opera. He's this great actor.
That's why I termed you the man of 1,000 faces. That's what exactly. I was thinking of. Yes. My father went to see the movies all the time with Lon Chaney. He told me he was the greatest actor.
Yeah, and
my father had met you.
Oh, well, I just always have thought that an actor's craft extends beyond just interpreting a role. It's you should know how to completely embody a character. So I started training myself to do makeup as a child, really as a child. But no, I just started getting fascinated with cross-gender performance at that time. And so I was learning as I was going. I'm glad I seemed so authoritative at the time. I think that was a cover for my real insecurity. I was only 3 years out of college at that point, and still trying to cut my teeth in the industry. But it was a very significant summer. I met my ex on that show, and we were together for 16 years. So you brought us together. And he had a drag performance career of his own. He was with Ballet Trocadero de Monte Carlo for 7 years and traveled all over the world dancing on point in a tutu.
Well, he was very talented as well. And we were blessed with a very, very stellar cast of performers. And I think I'm ever grateful to all those people for having opened my career up as a producer. I had done a lot of directing before and performance before that. But you were, I remember at one point I was stymied because I had a callback room and you said you would show them the dance steps that we wanted for the show. And I think you actually gave me some of the giving me the nod for men that you thought were going to be able to cut it. So it was great.
I got off.
we did a lot of stuff all at once, which is what the business is about, really. Mm-hmm. So very good. And when you went on from there, many, many things in your career, and it's something that I always think interesting in terms of the many roles that you have played, and the different types and styles of theater. What genre? Musicals, plays, because you've done so many plays. I'm going to be touching upon, I noticed one of my favorite series on TV, you were in that too, Succession. Such a fabulous. Are they coming back?
Oh, yes, they're shooting now.
Yeah, they're shooting now. The first 2 seasons are amazing. So, is there anything that you, at this point, because you have a substantial resume. I was very impressed by what I read. So is there one area that you feel more comfortable in than another?
It's interesting. My ambition was always to be a classical actor. And it took until my late 30s before I went back and got my master's degree. And that was at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. And I studied classical acting there and finally got to kind of like sink my teeth into Shakespeare, came out and promptly started doing mostly musicals. But musical theater has been a sort of a staple for me, and a wonderful place to be. And I do it all over the country. And but I've done a lot of different things, and I always felt like diversity and versatility were sort of part and parcel of being a really fine actor. But I love doing musical theater. I love it. And I've gotten to do some of my dream roles in the past 10 years. So I've been very lucky.
Really
very lucky.
A few of them that I was looking at the resume, as I said. Yeah, it's all of that. I think the versatility that you brought to the business, I think, is what makes you continue working, because you accept so many different angles of what we call the bigger avenue of theater. It's a very large experience. And of course, film and television is fabulous from the standpoint that it gives us another chance and gives us the opportunity to do pieces of work that will live on, so that you can always refer to it. So, but there's nothing quite live theater to me, and I'm sure to you as well. So we have many questions to ask today, and I hope that you can kind of flesh out everything in between as we go along. You mentioned that you were classically trained before you came to work for us. So where were you classically trained?
Well, before I came to work for you, I had done my undergraduate at Boston University. And the acting program at Boston University, they were teaching us to be what they called transformational actors. So they were teaching us with various different modalities from many different teachers at very diverse points of view, teaching us how to submerge ourselves into a character. I was frustrated because when I graduated, I was 21 years old. I looked 16, and I was a character guy. And my mentor at BU said to me, he said, "You're not really going to work until you're 40." And of course, you don't want to hear that when you're 21. But I had also started before that with my mom and her company in Massachusetts up on the North Shore of Boston. And I started dancing at 12, 13 years old. And I studied French mime and Luigi jazz technique and tap. So I was lucky to be in a theater family and to have a foundation that served me well, really served me well.
Well, you grew up with it. So it was essentially in your DNA. That was the experience that you had. And that is a fortunate way to begin, to get that kind of an experience. So I'm thinking now, as we've been discussing, that you mentioned at one point Lon Chaney from The Silent Screen, and he was a man of 1,000 faces. And as I've said, so are you. And I think that's the thing that makes it so amazing in the business. And at one point in doing, I always considered drag, when it's done correctly. I hope you will correct me on this if I'm wrong. I consider it art. It's a special category of art to do that, to make a transformation to that degree. So you were famous over your career for portraying two women in particular. And I'm going to inform our audience that one of them was the famous Broadway actress, Lauren Bacall, and screen actress. I can't forget that, but I can still see her on stage in New York in my mind. And she made such an indelible performance. Also, I'm thinking the other one that you had even more success with was Marlene Dietrich, a celebrated star from the golden age. What made you kind of go in the direction of those two women in particular?
Well, the Lauren Bacall happened by accident, really. I was living in Boston, and I was trying to sort of cut my teeth in the profession. And I was in a musical. I was doing Grease. I was playing the teen angel in Grease. And one of the other actors in the show happened to be a cabaret director. And we were at a party, and I had had a couple of glasses of wine. And I did this vocal impression of Lauren Bacall. And at the time, she was doing High Point commercials. She was doing decaffeinated coffee.
I remember that.
Which I always thought was hilarious. You know, Lauren Bacall drinking decaf. Really? I don't think so. So I did her voice, and she had that distinctive kind of whiskey tenor kind of voice. And this cabaret director said, "Oh my God, you have to do her." And I'm like, I'm 24 years old. I just started in the profession. I'm not going to do drag because I'll end up being pigeonholed. So I'm not doing it. And he kept coming at me. It took him a year to convince me, but the material was so funny. And doing a musical evening of a multiple Tony Award-winning musical theater star who was tone deaf, how do you resist, And it just kind of took on a life. We did it in Boston, and then a producer picked it up and helped me get to New York with it. And I played for two people at Don't Tell Mama for a few months. And I was seen by the team from a show called Howard Crabtree's Whoop-De-Doo, which was being done in the Village as part of this really amazing, fertile time of gay theater in New York in the early 90s.
Wonderful.
This was a few years after I met you. And that's what brought me to New York. Marlena came about because I was asked to do my Lauren Bacall impression. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can remember going to see you at Club Cafe, and it was very interesting in that act, in Lauren Bacall. And I had seen her in the production of Applause, which, of course, you're right, tone deaf, and she carried the show, and it was one hell of a show. So, yeah, and then you went on to doing Marlena. And
Yeah.
what prompted you to choose for your next person that was going to be central to your life, playing her so many times? And tell us how far you went with that. That was certainly became like a mini career for you.
Yeah. Well, it actually happened. It came about because I was part of a show that was based on the Las Vegas La Cage Review, which had been there for years and years and years in Vegas. And they wanted to do a New York version of it. And they did it at a club that no longer exists called the Blue Angel, which was on 45th Street. It was this very, very elegant, very beautiful showroom. And they were doing this female impersonation review. And they wanted a couple of performers who did their own voice rather than lip sync. And they hired me to sort of co-host as Lauren Bacall. And because of the Blue Angel being a Marlene Dietrich iconic film, the owner was a big Marlene fan. And she said, "Would you consider creating a Marlene Dietrich impersonation for the show?" And she financed my first costume and wig, and I worked on it. I had grown up with Marlene Dietrich all around me because she was my mother's grandmother's favorite. So when my mother was a little girl growing up in Brooklyn, she used to go and see all the Marlene Dietrich films with her grandmother. And she collected all of her albums, and my parents saw her in concert in the 70s when I was a child. So I had her in my ear. And what I loved about her was that she did very little, and yet you were hypnotized by her. She had this incredible sense of presence. And I wanted to see what it would be like to do a drag performance that wasn't camp, that wasn't for comic effect, that the audience would forget I was a man, and somebody who was very subtle and very, and she also, one of my shows, Black Market Marlena, which was really the most successful of my three shows that I did as her, I was in Top Hat and Tails, and she played with gender, and she understood the power of a woman in a man's costume. And so I got to walk that line. I got to be a man playing a woman dressed as a man, singing a song that a man sings to a woman. You know what I mean? And I think their imagination was really sparked by that. So I got to do Marlena for a number of years and performed in Berlin for the Millennium. And that was an incredible experience to be there and to be doing somebody who, in that culture, she's kind of revered and reviled at the same time. She's like their Joan Crawford. They want to think terrible things about her, but they also kind of revere her iconic status as a German-American performer.
Do you somehow look at the two women as Lauren Bacall being the person that gave you a platform so that you were secure enough to go forward with yet again another major transformation in the role of Marlene Dietrich.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, I went kicking and screaming. I mean, I really, I've been out since 1984 when I was in college. And you would think in a theater program, it would be perfectly fine to be openly gay. But at that time, it was a political act to be out. And as an actor, it was unheard of. I mean, unless you were just walking that lane, unless you were just doing gay oriented performance. So to me, it was like, it was risky, but I like risk, and I'm sort of drawn to it, even though I was, I feared being pigeonholed. I found it very, very fascinating to explore that world. And I was very lucky because when I was doing Lauren Bacall, initially, I did my show in Provincetown, which in the summertime is a big mecca, it's a big gay mecca. And I got to meet Randy Allen, the late, great Randy Allen, who at the time was very famous for doing his post-stroke Betty Davis. He had a show called
I saw that performance.
And he was a genius. And he saw my show and he took me under his wing and mentored me and taught me makeup techniques and things I still use today. And he really told me, he said, "You're an actor. And what we're doing is like any other role, except that we have to be able to do all of those transformational things as part of our craft." And he really inspired me to continue in that direction. And it turned out to be a really, really interesting, almost a decade of performance as a female impersonator.
This has always kind of made me wonder how people make choices. Did you look upon Lauren Bacall, the character of Lauren Bacall, as a platform, since it was your first, a platform moving you upward toward a bigger challenge with Marlene Dietrich?
Well, it certainly proved to be. I didn't expect it to be anything, and it ended up bringing me to New York and giving me a career. So you never know. But the Marlene work became very, very important to me because I was creating my own shows. I was producing them myself. I was directing myself, and I was collaborating with this brilliant group of musicians. And I got to break down some walls. I was the first performer to do female impersonation at the Firebird, which was a very sort of high-end cabaret room, which is no longer with us, unfortunately. I got to really kind of push the boundaries of what that form could do and could be. So I'm very blessed that way. And I also got to meet other incredible performers who work in drag, people like Charles Bush, people like David Drake, really remarkable people who are auteurs in their own right, who write their own material, who create things and direct things and produce things. So I think there was an entrepreneurial energy that was brought out of doing something that at the time, I think drag is very popular now. It's just a very different scene from what I was doing. We didn't have Drag Race. There was no mainstream sort of platform for drag. But people like RuPaul changed that.
Next question. So you see that in this particular time period we're living through, that we have a bigger canvas to perform drag on. But I think it's interesting from the time period that you were first doing it, that it was a lot of, most of it was being performed in clubs, and it would be a wonderful club act. And I think there's something about the intimacy of a club that lends to that. So it's an interesting thing to ponder. Now, the one thing I wanted to ask you, did you feel that Lauren Bacall became, you didn't do Lauren after you finished doing Marlene, did you again doing Lauren?
She made a comeback here and there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just wondered about that if you had such huge success with Marlene, that perhaps that she obscured the image of Lauren Bacall. But that's kind of hard to do. Lauren Bacall was a very vivid person. Why did you choose to do both these women?
Well, part of the reason is that I was able to imitate their voices and sing in their keys because they had deep voices. So that was part of it. And as I said before, Marlena was just around me growing up. My parents listened to her recordings and her music, and my mother really sort of held her up as an icon. And Lauren Bacall, I just think she's a hoot. I think she was a hoot. She starred in Applause after having this great career as an iconic, film actress and the wife of Humphrey Bogart. And then she came back and did another musical in the 80s and won the Tony again. And if you've listened to her recordings, not much of a singer. And I think the thing that I tapped into with her was just her audacity. She was a tough broad. And I think that part of the thing that makes drag performance a lasting thing in gay culture is that we want gay people who were oppressed and persecuted for so long wanted the release of being a diva, of being a ballsy, here it is, take it or leave it. And it gave an aperture for gay men to step into that in power. And I think, whenever I hear the occasional commentator, usually female, put down drag performance as misogynistic, I'm like, you don't get it. You don't get it. It's really about women have an innate power, and they're given, Hollywood did this and pop music did this. They're elevated. These divas are elevated to a level of goddess. They're like goddesses, and as gay men, where we don't fit into traditional roles for men in our culture, it gives us a release. It gives us an opportunity to be our own diva. I think it's a very complimentary thing, really.
I have another question, which I think bears very much upon separating, if you will, the men from the boys. What do you feel about the importance of doing the act with singing live?
It's interesting. When I was doing my act back in the day, there was a little bit of attitude from what I called the club drag performers, the performers who really are the bread and butter of drag performance in this country, the performers who lip sync and create a look and a persona. It's usually the way that drag performance is a part of gay culture. It's the enduring form. And I got a little attitude sometimes from some of those performers. They're like, oh, you think you're better than we are because you use your own voice. No, there was room for everybody. There was room for everybody. And this is the reason why I never fully got into Drag Race, because it has that kind of Real Housewives, kind of bitchy competition vibe. And that's not how I experienced the drag world. I was doing my thing, and then you had people like Miss Coco Peru, who's really a monologist. She's she writes these incredible stories and has this incredible persona. And, people like Shaquita back in the day, who was a countertenor who had trained at Juilliard and sang soprano arias. And there was room for everyone. And the respect of other performers came because what you did the best of anybody. And there was room for everyone. And I love that. I don't know of anybody who does the kind of performance that I was doing, the kind of impersonation I was doing today. I hope there are people doing it. But at the time, there were people like Jimmy James and Randy Allen, as I mentioned before. And Tommy Femia was doing Judy Garland, and Richard Skipper doing Carol Channing. I mean, there was a market for it. And I don't know, right now it seems to be very sort of over the top and lots of jump splits.
Yes, and what changed my attitude about how drag acts would appeal to me was authenticity in terms of I saw Jimmy James, I saw Jim Bailey, who did Barbara Streisand and did on alternate nights with doing Judy Garland. And at some point, I am not sure where I read this. I think it was in regard to Jim Bailey that he was a male actress. He deemed himself a male actress. I hope I'm not pinning a quotation on him that he didn't 100% say, but and I understood that immediately. And that made it so much more authentic for me that he was a man inhabiting a role, which happened to be, in this case, a famous woman singer, and inhabited that, as you did with both Lauren Bacall and Marlene Dietrich. So it's a strange kind of thing, and it's an adjustment, I think. Back in the days, Charles Bush was amazing. I saw him as well. And it really, to me, was a distinct art, is what I'm saying.
Still is. Still is. And, you know, many cultures.
I think of it as being separate from things for some reason. It's a distinctive art that kind of stands out for what it does. Do you agree?
Sure. I do. And I always thought of my Marlena stuff as, you know, Hal Holbrook had Mark Twain, you know, and, you know, now Audra McDonald has done Billie Holiday to perfection, like incredible. Embodying another person, especially somebody who's so beloved and so well known, you have to have a certain amount of reverence for that and a certain responsibility when you take that on. And that appealed to me because it meant that the level had to really be turned way, way up. And the responsibility to presenting yourself as accurately and authentically as you can. So that's a very specific form of female impersonation.
And I'm thinking of another question. It's what the performer would want to hear as the classification. For a long amount of time, people who did drag were called female impersonators, and then the word drag kind of took over all of it. And certainly with Drag Race, it really clinched it forever and a day. So what do you think is the correct way to introduce somebody who does drag in an act? What would you say?
You know, I think you have to defer to the individual performer, you know, but I don't think there's one label that's better than another. I think, you know, you don't want to get too highfalutin and say, I don't do drag, I'm an actor, you know, but maybe that's accurate. I mean, I felt it was an acting, and I never had a drag name, for example. I would sometimes have people say to me, well, what's your drag name? And I'd be like, I don't have a drag name. I play Marlene Dietrich, I play Lauren Bacall. I don't have a drag persona. That's another art form all unto itself. And to have an enduring, like, I mean, those are the people who have the long career. Coco Peru's still doing her stuff. I mean, and great. And she's got a wonderful presence on the web, and she's awesome. You know, Charles Bush is still writing plays for himself and still bringing that, his special, you know, brand of drag performance. So I just think, you know, it's just a different thing. And I always said I'm an actor playing a female part.
My comment at this point would be that there are as many different diverse drag acts as there are any other form of the business. And I think that's a healthy thing for all of us in a time period when we're discussing diversity, and it's so central to all of our work, to be talking about, even within the drag industry, there are so many differences in the people that perform and what their acts are. It's very good to hear that. Do you see yourself doing another drag act or impersonating another person of celebrity level? Is it something that you have been thinking about, or has that not been part of your operations at this point?
No, people have asked me that, and they're like, "When are you bringing Marlena back?" and blah blah blah. And the last time I did her, it gave my farewell performance in 2001. So that's 20 years. And I often say to people, drag is a young man's game. I had a teeny tiny little waist. I was a skinny Winnie, and I was able to transform more easily. And when you get older, content settled during shipping, as you know. No. And I also believe, I'm one of those people. I go all the way with something, and I invest myself completely in it. And when I feel like I've achieved what I needed to achieve, I move on to something else. And when I retired the Marlena act, I was the best I was ever going to be at it. So I left, I walked away knowing that I had done the best I could do. And then I went to grad school and studied Shakespeare and grew a beard and wielded a sword for a year.
So, of the roles that you've done in Shakespearean theater, which would you say is one that brought you either immense satisfaction or elevated you to another point in your career?
Well, doing Shakespeare is so enormously satisfying and so challenging. And for me, I'm a word person. I'm all about language and words. And for me, I'm just a geek that way. I think the most exciting, just a couple of years ago, I got to be a part of the first ever professional American production of a Shakespeare play done with an all-male cast in original Elizabethan performance practices and using original pronunciation. And I played Feste the Jester in Twelfth Night. And I got to work in as if it was the Elizabethan era with other actors, and I got to sing songs with a consort of original instrumentation, viol da gamba and recorders. It was just like stepping back in time, but yet it really brought it amazingly to life. And that was super exciting. And nobody had done that before or since. So I'm very lucky. That was at Orlando Shakespeare Theater.
That's wonderful. Is there a particular role that you aspire to, whether it's Shakespearean or any other famous playwright that you would like to embrace in your future?
Yeah, I mean, we all have a bucket list, and I'm lucky. I've gotten to do a few of my ultimate dream parts, like John Adams in 1776 and Thénardier Les Miserables, and I've gotten to do Nathan Detroit in Guys and Dolls, which I could play forever. I could play that role forever. It's the perfect role for a character man. I still want to play Fagin in Oliver. And in Shakespeare, I mean, everybody wants to play Richard III at some point or another, because it's the most outrageous villain. The closest I've gotten was Captain Hook. Playing Captain Hook, you can just do whatever you want. It's the most fearless, shameless villain in all of literature, I think. But I would like to play Claudius in Hamlet. I think he's a very interesting villain. He's a very conflicted guy and a very charismatic villain, smiling, damned villain. So I hope to do more Shakespeare. I haven't done as much as I'd like, but I've done about 25 parts of Shakespeare, thanks to my collaboration with a theater company in DC called Taffety Punk, which does an annual Shakespeare every summer at the Folger. And they've given me some great parts to do.
Let me ask you a question. I want to know if you've ever done Macbeth. For some reason, I thought at one point you had. I'm not sure of that.
Yes, I did. I played it in a small showcase, bare bones budget production here in New York, right before I went and did La Cage at Algonquin. It was a modern dress production, and it's a fascinating role. It's a really beautiful part. I think too many times directors emphasize the blood and gore and witchcraft and don't get into the real moral story of Macbeth, which is of a man who consciously sells his soul for power. He knows what he's doing is wrong, and he does it anyway, and he pays the price because he loses his humanity. And I think it's very powerful role to play.
I would like to add that that would be something that plays well in every era of our lives, because we see it in every single era. People are selling themselves for gain and for advancement. It's an amazing kind of a thought, and so that's what makes it a classic, obviously. So that's great. So probably the last question, and I hope it's an interesting answer. I'm sure it will be. In terms of what are you doing next? What is your next project?
Well, that's a good question, because most of us who work in theater are wondering when we're going to get to work again. I have a good friend who's in one of the tours of Wicked, and we know those big, blockbuster shows, Wicked and Hamilton and Lion King, are reopening on Broadway in September. And tours are already starting to reopen because cities are reopening. But I don't know what the next thing is going to be, because I don't know when the work is going to be available. I work as a coach now for actors, so I do a lot of that virtually. And I've had some great success working with actors. So I'm certainly be doing that. And we'll see. I don't know. I have to stay in the area in New York because my beloved mom, is across the river in Englewood at the Actors Fund home, living there, and I'm the closest person to her. So I want to stay close to my mom. But there'll be something. The thing I say to people all the time when they get upset about, the shutdown, and it's certainly our industry has suffered greatly, and our union has suffered greatly. But I say to them, theater will always be with us, because people hunger for that. They want to come together, and they want to have an adventure together and an experience together. Nothing can take the place of it. And everybody's always prognosticating the death of theater, but it's always going to be here. And I think we're going to see a huge resurgence in live performance and a demand for it, because people have been stuck in their apartments watching Netflix for over a year. So I'm hopeful something will come. I don't know what it'll be, but I've said to my actor friends over the past year, we as theater people are in the perfect position to be able to help other people deal with this stagnation that we've been in, because we're used to uncertainty. We're used to not knowing where the next job is going to come from, and making do in between and finding ways to be creative. So I'm doing some writing, and we'll see what happens with that. But I have every faith that a great part will come and find me. And God bless you as a producer for stepping back out there and giving people an opportunity to do the work they love, and to bring your audience into the theater and experience again what that communal experience can be.
Well, I do think that you have inspired so many people. You inspired me from the first day that I worked with you. And I think that's what producers look for. That's what I always used to look for when I was producing. And it made me, if I saw a performer that was really, really exceptional, it made me do more work in trying to mount a production that was as complete as it could be. And that is the role of a good producer. So I want to thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. It's been absolutely wonderful. You certainly made us aware of various avenues of the performance field and all the performance arts. And of course, we all know that the theater, and we're all saying this at this point because we're about to open with a one-person drag act, and it's going to be very exciting. And so we start by walking, and then we'll be running. And that's the important thing to think about. And so, Jamie Beeman, it's been my pleasure. I hope we see each other soon.
Me too. Happy Pride. And thank you for keeping gay culture and the celebration of our diverse and talented community alive. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and God bless you.
You too. Thank you.